sunny and 73 degrees in downtown Seattle. I'm Ursula Royteen.
Download our app to listen on your smartphone. KIRO Radio 97.3 FM. News and talk. Powered by the Pacific Northwest.
The Big Lead is brought to you by 3010 Weight Loss for Life.
The Dori Monson Show on KIRO Radio. This is The Big Lead.
Coming to you from the Carter Subaru studio and streaming on Facebook Live. Welcome! Welcome to The Big Show, and what a show we have for you today. At 12:30 this afternoon, it is the season debut of the Pete Carroll Show. Seahawks coach will join me for the full half hour from 12:30 to 1 o'clock this afternoon. We will talk about the makeup of this year's team, how fired up he is for the season to begin on Sunday, and lots of other stuff. Preview that game against the Bengals. You will hear it right here on your home of the Seattle Seahawks, 97.3 KIRO FM. I will have our pregame show with all of my co-hosts starting at 10 o'clock Sunday morning, and it is a 1:05 kickoff, the Seahawks and the Bengals. So again, the Pete Carroll Show, season debut. Coach is with me every Friday before Sunday games, and we'll talk with the coach at 12:30 this afternoon here on the Dori Monson Show. We got an awful lot of news to get to. Let's get right into the Big Lead.
The Big Lead. Top story.
I talked about this yesterday, and now I have some audio to share with you. I do not need government officials to tell me how to run my life. I just don't need it. I actually have made pretty good decisions about my life. And more than ever, we have a lot of helpless, hopeless people who have decided that they are fine. They are comfortable with government telling them how to live. So now I've got some audio to share with you. I told you about this yesterday. Seattle City Councilman Mike O'Brien. Mike O'Brien has introduced a bill that certainly will pass. It is to ban natural gas in Seattle. And what he wants to do is for any new construction, for any, if people want to change out an oil furnace in the future, won't be allowed. And I told you, I've had almost every source of heat imaginable. We had an oil furnace that was ramshackle and went out half the time when I was a kid. And then the second house my wife and I bought, the only source of heat was a wood stove. I had to get up at 3 in the morning to stoke that in the wintertime. That was miserable. Electric heat, had that for a while. It was so expensive. And then we built a house about 15 years ago. We got natural gas. Got a natural gas fireplace. My barbecue is natural gas. Our furnace, our stove, everything. Natural. I love it. It's been my choice of how to heat things. And to have a politician come along and tell us that we no longer will have that option because he says that it's bad for climate change, which is the reason for, all of these things they want to impose on our lives. It's about climate change. So Mike O'Brien talked about what his new anti-natural gas legislation will do.
This piece of legislation we're talking about would prohibit new construction, so new buildings, from hooking up to natural gas lines. This is a first step. It's a rather small step, but it's a first step in a direction towards becoming a 100% climate pollution-free city by the year 2030, essentially in the next decade.
We're going to be 100% climate pollution-free, he says. Natural gas was always touted as the clean alternative. It burns clean. But he says, and he tells his personal story, his personal evolution of heating his homes.
My wife and I bought our house in Seattle 25 years ago. It didn't have natural gas, but one of the first things we did when we moved in is we bought natural gas to the house. We did that because 25 years ago, I was still an environmentalist then, and I believed that was the right thing to do as an environmentalist. We were getting rid of our oil furnace, and at the time, electricity seemed like a dirtier alternative because at the time, our electric grid had coal on it. Well, some things have changed in the last 25 years.
Okay, so he's decided that and because he's attached that this is all about climate change, of course it's going to pass the council unanimously because there are no free, independent thinkers in Seattle politics. Nobody's allowed to dissent in any way. And he said, but it's the way they extract the natural gas is why he hates it now.
Where our natural gas comes from is shifted. The majority of the natural gas we burn in our city is now fracked gas, which has devastating impacts to the communities where it's produced.
You know what? He's full of fracked gas.
We have also learned more about the impacts of this fracked gas on our climate. The methane leaks that are caused as part of that system are 25 times more potent than CO2 as a global warming agent.
So Michael Bryant's going to tell us what we can and can't use for personal decisions like heating our home. And you know, I talked about this. I'll replay something I had yesterday. But that's what his party is all about telling us how to live our lives. They had that climate town hall on CNN on Wednesday. And all they could talk about is what they're going to take away from you and me.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What would people
Yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes.
So would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
Just today, the Trump administration announced plans to overturn requirements on energy-saving light bulbs. Would you reinstate those requirements as president?
If you can get electricity from a light bulb that utilizes 1/10 of the power that an old incandescent light bulb used, of course you're going to do that.
We have to take combustion engine vehicles off the road as rapidly as we can.
Especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have.
Okay. And Bernie wants us to pay for abortions in other countries for climate change. I've got another minute of this montage. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but that's all that it's about, is we are smarter than you. We are more noble than you. We are better stewards of your life than you can be. And this is the part that amazes me, is that this is what some people want. The people actually are comfortable having, Mike OBrien is somebody who's never wanted for anything for 1 second of his life. As I've told you, grew up in Clyde Hill, went to Lakeside High School, went to Duke, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, has never known what one day on this earth is like to want for anything financially. And yet, when he says, well, people might drive on downtown streets to avoid the toll in the tunnel, so we've got to toll downtown streets. As I've mentioned many times, if you are poor, if you cannot afford to give the government an extra $500 a year to drive through the tunnels, you have to avoid it, even if it means putting yourself in more traffic because you simply cannot afford to drive through the tunnel. And Mike OBrien's solution to that is, well, we got to toll the streets. We'll get them that way then. That's what happens when you have never wanted for anything in your life. You don't have any empathy, compassion for poor people, for working class people. You believe that you are, because he has had such a gilded life, he believes that he's smarter than poor people. It's such a condescending, a royalty type attitude. And I'm just begging you. Be responsible for your own life. Make good decisions for you. Don't rely on government to tell you that you can't eat red meat. Don't have them take some of your paycheck, some of your earnings, so they can send it to African nations to pay for women's abortions in the name of climate change. It's insane. It's pure insanity. And again, any voter who says, I want somebody to tell me how to live, what a sad, pathetic way to go through life. So anyway, no more natural gas in Seattle. The politicians are providing all the methane emissions that we need. Up next in the Big Lead.
The Big Lead, Big Local.
So what is the future of Sound Transit? Another agency that's spending $100 billion, $25,000 for every man, woman, and child in the taxing district for something that's going to be obsolete. And we're seeing now in San Francisco, where they are a few decades ahead of us with their BART system. And what's happening with the BART system in San Francisco right now is a preview of what is to come with Sound Transit. A bunch of homeless people were camping out at the BART stations. And they found that crime skyrocketed as a result of that. People didn't want to have to step over feces and urine to get on the train. And so they cracked down and said, can't camp out in the BART stations. So where did the homeless people go? Onto the BART trains. So there has been a sharp drop in transients at the stations, but there are record numbers of homeless people who are living on the trains right now. Robberies on BART trains are up 128% over the last 5 years. Aggravated assaults up 83%. Ridership is down. And when asked why, people said, you're sitting across from a homeless person and you see them soil themselves while you're sitting on the train car with them. And so as tough as traffic is in the Bay Area, they've had 4 million fewer passengers from 2016 to 17, and then another 4 million passenger drop-off between 17 and 18. And they say that there's so much unsavory or erratic behavior, drug use, mental illness in the confined space of moving trains, it's become a deal breaker for a lot of the passengers. And so they're just not using it. It has become a rolling homeless shelter. And you know, with certainty, you know that that's what's going to happen with Sound Transit. Because we've encouraged as many homeless people and drug vagrants as possible to come to our region. And so they, too, are going to use our trains that we're spending. I mean, your family of 4 is spending $100,000 on Sound Transit. That is not an exaggerated number. It's dead on. And then the other Sound Transit issue, I told you there are a lot of community activists. I told you this yesterday. They were very upset because high school kids who weren't paying the fare on the first day, they get these free ORCA cards now, which means other taxpayers get to pay for other people's kids' transportation. But some kids hadn't gotten the card yet. They easily could have. They just didn't. So what'd they do? They just got on the trains and rode them without paying the fare. Well, some Sound Transit enforcement people were issuing not citations, but warnings. And even that upset people. Jesse Agopian is a substitute teacher in Seattle, and he talked to King 5 News.
It's just a level of intimidation that's really unnecessary. Cut these kids some slack. This is their first day of school. Their only anxiety should be about making new friends and how they're going to do in geometry class, not about having to stare down these fare enforcers and worry about what's going to happen with their ID. We really can't.
So you have a Seattle school teacher who's encouraging kids to steal because that's what fare jumping is, stealing from taxpayers. We have encouraged this irresponsibility. But again, and then when Sound Transit just gives a warning, people are outraged that we would dare try to keep kids from stealing from taxpayers. What a mentality we have. It's incredible. Next up in the big lead.
Your read on the big lead.
We had an exclusive story yesterday that has just taken off like, well, wildfire. I talked to a guy down in Centralia. He had a little birdhouse on his property. Bees were in the birdhouse, and it has started a legal nightmare for Matthew Buchanan. Tell me what went down here.
Okay, so I just bought a new house. My girlfriend and I have been there, I believe, spent 2 nights, and every time we'd go outside, she kept getting stung by hornets. I realized that they were in a little birdhouse on a post next to the house.
Okay.
I sprayed them with hornet spray. It was ineffective. The next evening, I put a paper towel in there, lit it on fire, let it burn for a few minutes, completely extinguished it. There was no burn ban. This has been clear back in June.
Okay.
I took the garden hose, completely filled the birdhouse full of water.
Yeah.
And we went to bed.
Okay.
That was about 9:45.
Okay. Yeah.
Right at midnight, we woke up to sirens, lights, spotlights coming in the window, people beating on the window, screaming, yelling. And I went to the door. They want to know what took me so long to get up, and I explained that I was sound asleep. It was midnight.
Right.
And it escalated from there. They dispatched 11 firefighters and 4 police officers. So they issued me a criminal citation, a mandatory court appearance to appear in court. And first of all, they put the wrong name on the police report. It actually had my brother's name on it.
Okay.
So I thought that right there would be enough to dismiss it. And so far, I went to court 4 times now, and they've offered me a plea bargain kind of deal to, I guess, to make it go away. But I believe, the way I understand it, I have to plead guilty to the charges, and I will pretty much receive 6 months probation and be forced to enroll in a fire safety class.
Okay, so this poor guy, 42 years old, has been law-abiding his entire life, and now he's forced to do a plea bargain, which is pleading guilty, just so he doesn't go to jail. He faces up to a year in jail. So I got a tremendous response from you. Blaine in Seattle said if he was illegally camping on the property with 29 hits of heroin and lit the birdhouse on fire in a fit of rage, he'd be given a taxpayer-funded aid package instead of a criminal charge. Another person, David in Chimicum, throw this working man under the table. There was no damage, only his birdhouse. I'm embarrassed for the fire department and local police. And go check out the story. We've got just an incredible number of comments, mynorthwest.com. And we contacted the prosecutor. He has not gotten back to us as of yet. That is your big lead for today.
The Big Lead on KIRO Radio.
Coming up next, the season debut. It's the Pete Carroll Show on the Dori Monson Show.
This hour of the Dori Monson Show is brought to you by Insulation Northwest.
What are the odds an aimless kid from Ballard would grow up to become Seattle's most fiery and most listened to